Hey, what is up, everyone? Today we got a pretty unique story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. Get cozy and watch till the end, guys.
There is a sound that exists at the very edge of hearing. It is not quite music, and it is not quite a voice. It lives somewhere between a lullaby and a scream. And if you have ever found yourself awake at 3 in the morning, staring at a ceiling you cannot see, with a longing in your chest that you cannot name, then you have heard it. You just did not know what was calling to you. In the grim darkness of the far future, that sound has a name. It has a face, though the face changes depending on who is looking at it. It has a throne built from the crystallized desires of 1,000,000,000,000 souls, and it sits at the center of a realm so beautiful that merely glimpsing it through the veil of sleep has driven entire planetary populations to madness. Its name is Slaanesh, the Dark Prince, the Lord of Excess, she who thirsts. And today, we are going to do something that most people in the Warhammer 40,000 universe would never survive. We are going to walk through the daily lives of those who serve this youngest and perhaps most terrifying of the Chaos Gods. From the lowliest Hive City cultist whispering prayers over a hidden altar, to the 10,000-year-old noise marine whose senses have been refined and ruined beyond anything a mortal mind could comprehend. We are going to see what it actually looks like, hour by hour, moment by moment, to live under the dominion of the Prince of Pleasure. And I promise you, it is nothing like what you might expect. Before we walk those perfumed and poisoned corridors, though, we need to understand something fundamental about Slaanesh. This is not simply a god of carnal indulgence, though the uninitiated might be forgiven for thinking so. Slaanesh is the god of excess in all its forms. Every sensation pushed past its natural limit. Every emotion amplified beyond what the mortal frame was designed to contain. Every pursuit of perfection that crosses the line from dedication into obsession. The musician who practices until her fingers bleed and then keeps playing because the pain has become part of the melody. The warrior who no longer fights to win, but to feel the exquisite artistry of the blade finding flesh. The painter who blinds himself so that he can truly see the colors that exist only in the mind's eye. These are the people who hear the whisper of Slaanesh most clearly, and once they begin to listen, they can never stop. Yet the birth of Slaanesh is itself a story of daily life gone wrong on a civilizational scale. Long before humanity crawled out of its cradle on ancient Terra and reached for the stars, there was another species that ruled the galaxy. The Aeldari, sometimes called the Eldar in older texts, had built an empire so vast and so sophisticated that they had, for all practical purposes, solved every problem that a civilization could face. They had conquered death, mastered the manipulation of reality itself through psychic ability and technology that made the best efforts of the Imperium look like a child banging rocks together. They had no enemies that could threaten them, no diseases that could harm them, no scarcity of any resource they might desire. They had achieved in every measurable way perfection, and that was the problem. Well, when a species that powerful and that psychically gifted has nothing left to struggle against, it turns inward. The Aeldari began to explore the only frontier left to them, the frontier of experience itself. At first, this was harmless enough. New forms of art emerged that engaged senses humans do not even possess. Music was composed that could only be appreciated by minds capable of processing emotional frequencies that would fry a human brain. Architecture was designed that existed partially in real space and partially in the immaterium. Buildings that shifted and changed according to the emotional state of those who walked through them. It was magnificent. It was beautiful. And it was the first step on a road that led to the abyss. Because the nature of sensation is that it dulls with repetition. The meal that delighted you the first time you tasted it becomes ordinary by the 10th. The view that took your breath away becomes a background you barely notice after a year. The Aeldari, with their heightened senses and their effectively immortal lifespans, experienced this dulling on a scale that is almost impossible to imagine. What once brought them joy became merely pleasant, and what was pleasant became boring, and what was boring became intolerable. They needed more, always more, Stronger flavors, louder music, more vivid colors, more intense emotions. They pushed deeper and deeper into extremity, crossing boundaries that should never have been crossed, indulging in acts that made their ancestors turn away in disgust and then in horror. And then they stopped watching altogether, because what the Aeldari had become was no longer recognizable as the species they had once been. The pleasure cults that formed during this period were not fringe movements. They were the mainstream of Aeldari society. Entire worlds became dedicated to the pursuit of new experiences. The concept of enough ceased to exist. And in the roiling depths of the warp, in that dimension of pure psychic energy that mirrors and amplifies the emotions of all living things, something began to stir. Something was being born. It was being knitted together from every act of indulgence, every abandoned scruple, every moment when an Aeldari looked at a line they knew they should not cross, and crossed it anyway with a smile on their face. It grew slowly at first, and a ripple in the warp that the most sensitive psychers could detect but not understand. Then it grew faster, fed by the escalating spiral of Aeldari excess, until the ripple became a wave, and the wave became a tide, and the tide became something that could not be stopped by any force in the galaxy. When Slaanesh was finally born, it did not arrive quietly. The psychic scream of its birth ripped a hole in the fabric of reality itself, a wound in space that still bleeds to this day. We call it the Eye of Terror. Millions of Aeldari worlds were consumed in an instant, dragged screaming into the warp as the newborn god devoured the souls of the species that had created it. The Aeldari Empire, the greatest civilization the galaxy had ever known, was destroyed in a single moment of catastrophic birth. Or those few Aeldari who survived did so either by being far from their homeworlds at the time or by adopting extreme measures to protect their souls from the hungry newborn god that would pursue them for the rest of eternity. The Craft World. Aeldari survived by binding their souls to spirit stones, crystalline matrices that prevented Slaanesh from claiming them at death. The Harlequins survived through a mysterious ritual that placed them under the protection of the laughing god, Shegorak, and the Drukhari, the dark kin who retreated into the webway city of Komorach, survived by feeding the hunger of Slaanesh with the suffering of others, a stopgap measure that required constant cruelty to maintain. All of them, in their own way, live every single day with the knowledge that Slaanesh is waiting for them, that the Dark Prince thirsts for their souls with a hunger that can never be satisfied. That one moment of weakness, one lapse in their psychic discipline, and they will be devoured. That is the legacy of Slaanesh's birth. That is what happens when an entire civilization gives itself over to the pursuit of sensation without limit. And that should have been a warning to every other species in the galaxy. But of course, it was not. Because the thing about Slaanesh is that the Dark Prince does not need an entire species to fall. A single soul is feast enough. And in the sprawling, desperate, suffering mass of humanity that populates the Imperium of man, there are billions upon billions of souls just waiting to be seduced. So let us talk about how it begins. Well, the thing that most people get wrong about Slaanesh worship is that they imagine it starting with something dramatic. They picture darkened rooms and forbidden rituals, hooded figures chanting around pentagrams drawn in blood, the sudden appearance of a demon with promises of power. And sometimes, yes, it does happen that way. But far more often, the road to Slaanesh begins with something so small and so ordinary that the person walking it does not even realize they have taken the first step. Imagine, if you will, a young woman living in the middle hive of a typical imperial world. Her name is not important. She could be anyone. She works in a manufactorum, assembling components for something she will never see completed, repeating the same motions 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, in a room so loud that she has already begun to lose her hearing. She sleeps in a hab block that she shares with 11 other workers. in a room barely large enough for her cot and a small locker that contains everything she owns. She eats nutrient paste that provides adequate sustenance, but has never, not once in her 23 years of life, tasted good. She has never heard music that was not a hymn to the emperor played on a crackling Vox speaker. She has never worn clothing that was not standard issue. She has never seen a sunset because the hive walls block the sky, and she has never smelled a flower because nothing grows in the chemical-saturated air of the manufactory levels. She is not unhappy precisely. She does not have the frame of reference for unhappiness, because she has never known anything else. Well, the Imperium is very careful about that. The ecclesiarchy teaches that suffering is holy, that toil is worship, that the reward for a life of faithful drudgery is peace in the emperor's light after death. And for billions of imperial citizens, this is enough. The faith sustains them. The routine structures them. The knowledge that they are part of something larger than themselves, that their labor contributes to the survival of humanity in a hostile galaxy, gives their existence a meaning that transcends its material conditions. But our young woman has a problem. She has an imagination, and one day, by pure accident, she finds something that the Imperium would very much prefer she had never discovered. Perhaps it is a scrap of fabric, a remnant of something that once belonged to a spire noble, discarded during one of the periodic purges of decadence that sweep through the upper hive. It is silk, or something close to it, and when she touches it, the sensation is unlike anything she has ever experienced. The Manufactorum issue clothing she wears is rough and functional, designed to last rather than to comfort. This fabric slides against her fingers like water made solid, cool and impossibly smooth, and for one breathless moment, she feels something she has never felt before. Pleasure. Pure, simple, physical pleasure, triggered by nothing more than the sensation of a fine material against calloused skin. That moment is the crack in the wall, and cracks, once formed, only widen. She begins to seek out other materials, as trading small favors with the Hab block recyclers, who sometimes come across fragments of luxury goods that have filtered down from the upper levels. A sliver of scented soap that smells of something she cannot name, but that makes her close her eyes and breathe deeper than she has in years. A broken piece of what might be a music box, which plays 3 notes of a melody that is more beautiful than any hymn she has ever heard. A colored stone, smooth and warm, that catches the flickering lumens of her hab and throws tiny rainbows on the wall. These are not evil things. There is nothing inherently wrong with enjoying a pleasant sensation or appreciating beauty. But in the context of imperial life, where every moment of pleasure is suspect and every departure from the norm is a potential heresy, they are dangerous, yet not because of what they are, but because of what they awaken. Our young woman has discovered that life can feel good, and having discovered that, she can never go back to being content with the way things were. This is the moment when Slaanesh first becomes aware of her. Not as an individual, not yet, but as a particular flavor of desire that the Dark Prince can taste on the psychic wind. Like a shark sensing blood in water miles away, Slaanesh turns its attention, however briefly, toward this small, insignificant soul that has just discovered the most basic truth of the Dark Prince's philosophy. That sensation is its own justification. That pleasure needs no excuse. That the universe is full of experiences waiting to be had, and that anything standing between you and those experiences is an obstacle to be overcome. She starts talking to others, carefully, cautiously, feeling out who among her fellow workers might share her secret fascination with beauty and sensation. She finds them, because they are everywhere. The man who hums tunes he has composed in his head while working the assembly line. The woman who collects tiny shells from the cooling vents that sometimes carry fragments of the ocean floor up through the hive's geothermal systems. The old man who carves small figures from waste material, giving them features and expressions that no piece of manufacturing detritus should possess. They are artists, all of them, though they would never use that word. They are people who have found small ways to push back against the grey monotony of their existence, to create moments of beauty and sensation in a world that offers neither. They begin meeting after their shifts, in a disused storage alcove that someone has furnished with salvaged cushions and a stolen lumen that casts warm light instead of the harsh white of the manufactorum. They share their treasures and their creations. They talk about what they have seen and what they dream of seeing. They develop rituals, not religious ones, not yet, but social rituals of greeting and sharing and appreciation that give their gatherings a sense of occasion and importance. And it is at this point that someone new arrives. Someone who smiles a little too easily and who seems to know things about pleasure and sensation that none of them have ever considered. Someone who brings gifts, small things at first, a bottle of something that is not nutrient-paced. A recording of music that makes the air itself seem to vibrate with emotion. A powder that, when inhaled, makes colors brighter and sounds sharper, and the touch of another person feel like an electrical current running through every nerve. This person is a recruiter. They work for a Slaaneshi cult, though they would never call it that. They call themselves a society of aesthetic excellence, or a circle of elevated awareness, or simply friends who have learned to appreciate the finer things in life. Their language is seductive because it does not feel like seduction. It feels like liberation. It feels like someone is finally telling you what you have always suspected but never dared to say out loud, that the Imperium's obsession with suffering and denial is wrong. Is that the Emperor would not have created a universe full of such beauty and sensation if he did not want his children to enjoy it. That the truly faithful are not those who deny themselves, but those who embrace everything that creation has to offer. The transition from secret appreciation society to full-blown Slaaneshi cult does not happen overnight. It happens in stages, each one seeming like a natural progression from the last. The gatherings become more frequent, the substances become stronger, the experiences become more extreme. The things that once seemed shocking become normal, and new boundaries must be found and crossed. Members begin to change, sometimes subtly, sometimes dramatically. Their senses sharpen to an almost painful degree. Colors become brighter, sounds louder, textures more vivid. They find that ordinary life has become almost unbearable by comparison. The dullness of the manufactorum, a physical agony after the heightened reality of their gatherings. Some of them begin to show physical changes as well. A pattern that appears on the skin like an elaborate tattoo, but that was never applied by any needle. A lengthening of the fingers that makes them more graceful, but also somehow wrong. Eyes that catch the light in ways that human eyes should not. The number 6 begins to appear in their lives with increasing frequency, in the patterns of their scars, in the number of petals on the flowers they cultivate, in the rhythms of the music they create. By the time our young woman realizes what has happened, what she has become, it is far too late. She is not the person she was. She does not want to be the person she was. And that person was numb and blind and deaf to the glories of a universe that thrums with sensation. This new version of her is alive in a way that the old version never was. She can feel the texture of the air on her skin. She can taste emotions in the breath of the people around her. She can hear the heartbeat of the hive itself, a rhythm that speaks to something deep inside her that has no name, but that she knows, with absolute certainty, belongs to the most beautiful being in the universe. She is a servant of Slaanesh now, and her daily life has become something that would make an inquisitor reach for a flamer. So what does a typical day actually look like for someone who has given themselves over to the service of the Dark Prince? The answer depends enormously on who they are and where they sit in the vast hierarchy of Slaanesh's followers. A mortal cultist in a hive city lives a very different life from an emperor's children noise marine aboard a strike cruiser in the Eye of Terror, who in turn lives nothing like a demonet in the Palace of Pleasure at the heart of Slaanesh's realm in the Warp. But there are common threads that connect all of these experiences, patterns of behavior and obsession that mark the daily existence of anyone who serves the Lord of Excess. Let us start with the most common and, in many ways, the most tragic, the mortal cultist. The morning begins not with an alarm, but with sensation. The cultists who have progressed far enough in their devotion to have undergone the first modifications to their nervous systems do not experience waking the way ordinary humans do. There is no groggy transition from sleep to consciousness, no bleary blinking at the light. Instead, there is a sudden, overwhelming flood of sensory input as augmented nerves fire all at once. The feel of the fabric against their skin is loud enough to be heard. The temperature of the air has a color, a shifting gradient of warm and cool that paints the room in hues that no unmodified eye could perceive. The smell of their own body is a complex symphony of chemical signatures, each one telling a story about what they ate, what they dreamed, what they felt during the night. For a new initiate, this experience is overwhelming and often terrifying. Some cultists have been known to spend their first augmented morning curled in a ball, whimpering, unable to process the sheer volume of information that their modified senses are delivering. But for those who have lived with these changes for weeks or months, the morning flood is the first fix of the day, a rush of pure sensation that sets the baseline for everything that follows. And the baseline keeps rising. Every week, every month, the same intensity of sensation that once brought them to their knees becomes merely normal. And they need something stronger, something more, to achieve the same effect. The physical space in which a Slaaneshi cultist lives tells you everything about their stage of corruption. Early-stage cultists often maintain the appearance of normal Imperial citizens. Their hab blocks look the same as anyone else's, as with perhaps a few more personal items than might be strictly standard, a piece of colored fabric hung as a curtain, a small collection of interesting stones arranged on a shelf, a candle that releases a scent when lit. The hidden altar, if there is one, is usually portable and easily concealed, a small cloth bearing the symbol of the Dark Prince that can be rolled up and hidden in a wall cavity at a moment's notice. But as the corruption deepens, the living space transforms. Walls are covered with fabrics in every texture and color, creating a cocoon of sensation that insulates the cultist from the harsh reality outside. Lumens are replaced with candles or bioluminescent organisms that cast shifting, unpredictable light. The air is thick with incense and other, less identifiable substances that alter perception in subtle ways. A music plays constantly, sometimes from hidden speakers, sometimes from instruments that the cultists have crafted themselves, sometimes from sources that seem to have no physical origin at all. Every surface is designed to engage the senses, smooth metals beside rough stone, beside soft leather, beside something that pulses gently with its own warmth, as if it were alive. The furniture, if you can call it that, is designed not for utility, but for experience. There are no chairs, only arrangements of cushions and supports that can be configured into an infinite variety of positions, each one offering a different combination of comfort and pressure against the body. There are no tables, only surfaces at various heights that might hold food, art supplies, drugs, and/or objects whose purpose is not immediately apparent, but whose shapes invite the hand to touch and explore. The bed, if it exists as a separate item, is often the largest and most elaborate piece in the space, a construction of fabrics and supports and hidden compartments that serves as the central altar of the cultist's daily devotion. The morning rituals of a Slaaneshi cultist vary enormously from individual to individual, because one of the core tenets of Slaanesh's philosophy is that every person must find their own path to excess. There is no standard liturgy, no prescribed set of prayers to be recited at dawn. Instead, each cultist develops their own morning practice based on their particular obsession. For some, it begins with the careful preparation and consumption of food, not the nutrient paste of their former lives, but meals that have been crafted with obsessive attention to flavor, texture, temperature, and visual presentation. A single breakfast might take an hour to prepare and another hour to eat. Every bite, a meditation on the nature of taste and the infinite variations that can be coaxed from even the simplest ingredients. For others, the morning begins with the body itself. The application of cosmetics and the arrangement of clothing is not a practical exercise in appearance maintenance, but a form of worship. Every color choice, every texture, every accessory is selected to create a specific sensory effect, not just on those who see the cultist, but on the cultist themselves. The feel of a particular fabric against a particular area of skin, the weight of a piece of jewelry, the way a specific color interacts with the light at different times of day, all of these are considered with the same gravity that an imperial priest might bring to the selection of holy vestments. Still others begin their day with art, painting, sculpting, composing music, writing poetry, crafting objects of beauty from whatever materials are available. The creative drive of a Slaaneshi cultist is ferocious and unending, fueled by the heightened perceptions that their devotion brings and the desperate need to externalize the sensations that threaten to overwhelm them from within. The art they produce is often genuinely extraordinary, possessing a quality that is difficult to define but impossible to ignore. It speaks to something deep in the viewer, stirring emotions and desires that they might not have known they possessed. This is, of course, exactly the point. Slaaneshi art is not merely decorative. It is a vector of corruption, a beautiful trap that draws the admirer closer to the dark prince with every viewing. But regardless of how the morning begins, one element is universal: the prayer. It is not spoken aloud, for the followers of Slaanesh rarely use words when sensation will suffice. Instead, the morning prayer is an act of deliberate, focused pleasure. It might be a single perfect bite of food, savored with full attention. It might be the stroke of a brush across canvas, the bristles releasing a whisper of sound that sends a shiver down the spine. It might be nothing more than a deep breath, and drawing the scented air into lungs that have been modified to extract every molecule of fragrance and deliver it to a brain that can process smells with the same complexity that an unmodified human reserves for sight. Whatever form it takes, the morning prayer is a moment of communion with Slaanesh. The cultist opens themselves to the warp, allowing the influence of the Dark Prince to flow through them, amplifying their senses still further, deepening their connection to the patron who has shown them what life can truly be. In that moment, they feel the presence of their god like a warm current running through every nerve in their body, a presence that is simultaneously comforting and demanding, loving and hungry, beautiful and terrible. And then the day begins in earnest. For those cultists who still maintain a cover identity in imperial society, which is the majority of them in the early and middle stages of corruption, the contrast between their morning rituals and the rest of their day is almost unbearable. They walk out of their enhanced, sensation-saturated living spaces and into the grey, screaming, monotonous world of the imperial hive. The noise of the manufactorum, which once was simply unpleasant, is now physically painful to senses that have been cranked up to levels they were never designed to handle. The nutrient paste that they must be seen eating in the refectory is an assault on a palate that has been trained to distinguish between 1,000 different flavors. At the touch of standard issue clothing against skin that can feel the individual fibers of the fabric is an irritation that borders on agony. This is the hidden suffering of the early Slaaneshi cultist. They live in two worlds simultaneously, the world of enhanced sensation that they have chosen and the world of imperial drudgery that they cannot yet escape, and the gap between those two worlds grows wider every day. It is this gap that drives the corruption deeper, because the only relief from the agony of normal life is more sensation, more enhancement, more of whatever their particular obsession demands. Some cultists handle this by developing sophisticated coping mechanisms, small sensory anchors that they can access throughout the day without attracting attention. a piece of specially textured material hidden in a pocket that they can stroke with their fingers while working the assembly line. A tiny vial of concentrated scent worn against the skin that releases periodic waves of fragrance only they can smell. A set of sub-vocal tones that they hum at frequencies below normal human hearing, but that their enhanced ears can detect and process as music. These anchors serve a dual purpose, maintaining the cultists' connection to sensation and preventing the buildup of sensory deprivation that can, in extreme cases, cause augmented cultists to lash out violently when the gap between their two lives becomes too wide to bear. Others cope by finding ways to bring their worship into their daily work. The assembly line becomes a canvas for tiny acts of artistry, our components aligned with fractionally more precision than required, tools maintained with a loving attention that transforms maintenance into meditation. The rhythm of repetitive labor is reimagined as a kind of music, a percussion piece whose beauty lies in its regularity and the tiny, deliberate variations that the cultist introduces, like a jazz musician playing around a melody. Even the pain of physical labor can be transformed through the philosophy of Slaanesh into a form of worship, the burning of tired muscles and the ache of overworked joints becoming sensations to be explored and appreciated rather than endured. But the real life of the cultist, the life that matters, begins after the shift ends and the doors of the cult's meeting place swing open. The gathering space of a Slaaneshi cult is designed with the same obsessive attention to sensory detail as the individual living spaces of its members, but on a grander scale. Where a personal hab might have fabrics on the walls and a few candles for light, the cult's meeting place is a full-scale environment designed to immerse every person who enters it in a cocoon of enhanced sensation. The lighting is carefully calibrated to specific wavelengths that interact with modified eyes to produce colors that do not exist in the normal visible spectrum. The air is a carefully managed blend of fragrances and psychoactive compounds that alter mood and perception in predetermined ways. The surfaces of every wall, floor, and piece of furniture are covered in materials selected for their tactile properties, creating a landscape of texture that invites the body to move, to touch, to explore. The music that fills the space is not background noise. It is the heartbeat of the gathering, a carefully constructed soundscape that changes throughout the evening, guiding the emotional trajectory of the assembly from welcome, through celebration, through ecstasy, through whatever lies beyond ecstasy in the vocabulary of sensation that these people have developed. The musicians who create this soundscape are among the most valued members of the cult, and their instruments are often bizarre constructions that would baffle a conventional luthier, devices that produce sounds through combinations of vibrating strings, compressed gases, electromagnetic fields, and, in some cases, the agonized screams of living creatures whose vocal cords have been surgically modified to produce specific tones. The activities that take place during these gatherings are as varied as the members themselves. Some engage in collaborative art projects, constructing works of astonishing complexity and beauty that will never be seen by anyone outside the cult. Others participate in elaborate gustatory rituals, the preparation and consumption of meals that are designed not merely to nourish, but to push the experience of taste beyond anything the human palate was designed to handle. Still others engage in physical activities that blur the line between dance, combat, and something altogether more intimate, their enhanced bodies moving with a grace and precision that would be beautiful if the context were not so deeply disturbing. And through it all, there is the worship. Not formal, not structured, not recognizable as worship to someone raised in the Imperial Creed. It is woven into every activity like a thread of gold through dark fabric. Every sensation is dedicated to Slaanesh. Every moment of pleasure is an offering. Every new experience is a prayer. The cultists move through their evening in a state of constant, deliberate, focused awareness, treating every second as an opportunity to deepen their connection to the Dark Prince, to feel the god's presence more strongly, to offer up the energy of their pleasure as fuel for the insatiable hunger of the youngest Chaos god. As the evening deepens and the substances and rituals take effect, the individual identities of the cultists begin to blur. The boundaries between self and other, between pleasure and pain, as between the material world and the warp, grow thin. In the most advanced cults, those that have been operating for decades or centuries and whose members have undergone extensive modification, the gatherings can reach a point where the veil between real space and the immaterium tears open entirely, and the cultists find themselves in the presence not merely of the god's influence, but of the god's servants. Daemonettes, the lesser daemons of Slaanesh, have been known to manifest at such gatherings, their impossible beauty and their razor-edged claws equally capable of delivering pleasure and death in the same stroke. When morning comes again, the cultists emerge from their gathering place blinking, dazed, often physically marked by the night's activities. They return to their habs, sleep for whatever hours remain before their shifts begin, and then rise to face another day of imperial drudgery, carrying within them the memory of pleasures that would make an inquisitor weep with horror and a burning, desperate need to experience them again. This is the daily cycle of a Slaaneshi cultist: agony and ecstasy, drudgery and transcendence, the grey world and the world of colour. And every day, the gap between the two grows a little wider, the need grows a little stronger, and the person they used to be fades a little further into the distant past. Now picture something larger. Picture an entire hive city, one of those vertical mountains of metal and humanity that house billions of souls on the industrialized worlds of the Imperium. Picture the layers of that city, from the sunlit spires where the nobility lives in relative luxury, down through the middle hive where the working population toils in endless manufactorums, down further still into the underhive where the forgotten and the damned scrape out existences in darkness and decay. Every layer of this city has its own relationship with Slaanesh, and the cults that operate within it have adapted themselves to exploit the unique vulnerabilities of each social stratum. In the upper hive, among the nobility and the merchant houses, Slaaneshi cults operate with a sophistication that would impress even the most seasoned inquisitor. These are not gatherings of desperate workers seeking escape from misery. These are salons, exclusive social clubs, where the wealthy and the powerful come together to explore the limits of experience in settings of unimaginable luxury. The organizers of these salons are often among the most respected figures in hive society: planetary governors, high-ranking administratum officials, ecclesiarchy confessors, even, on rare and terrible occasions, members of the Inquisition itself. They hide their devotion behind the facades of legitimate social clubs, art appreciation societies, wine-tasting circles, and other gatherings that would attract no suspicion in a culture where the upper classes are expected to maintain certain social traditions. The daily life of an upper hive Slaaneshi cultist is a masterclass in deception and duality. In public, they are model imperial citizens. They attend church services with appropriate devotion. They fulfill their administrative duties with competence, and they make generous donations to imperial charities and speak eloquently about the virtues of sacrifice and duty. Their homes are decorated with tasteful art that references imperial themes, portraits of the emperor, scenes from the Great Crusade, symbols of faith and loyalty. But behind the public facade, their private chambers tell a different story, where the lower hive cultists create their sensory environments from salvaged materials and improvised substances. The upper hive cultists have access to resources that allow them to construct experiences of staggering complexity and intensity. Private galleries display art that shifts and changes as you watch it, works created by corrupted artists whose brushes are guided by whispers from the warp. Music rooms contain instruments that produce sounds no conventional technology can generate, as notes that resonate with the listener's neural pathways and trigger cascades of emotion that bypass the conscious mind entirely. Dining rooms are equipped with kitchens where chemist cooks craft meals that are more chemistry experiment than cuisine, dishes that stimulate specific combinations of taste receptors in sequences designed to produce predictable emotional states.
Honestly, this is what makes Slaanesh my favorite chaos god to cover on this channel. Not because the lore is the most shocking, though it definitely can be, but because it is the most human. Khorne is rage, Nurgle is despair, Tzeentch is scheming. Sorry if I butchered the name, but Slaanesh is just wanting something more out of life and not knowing when to stop. We have all felt that pull in some small way, that itch for something better, something more exciting, something that makes you feel alive. Games Workshop took that universal feeling and cranked it up to a galactic scale, and I think that is genuinely brilliant writing. It is the one chaos god where you can actually understand why someone would fall. And that makes it scarier than any bloodthirster or great unclean one ever could. But anyway, let's keep going.
The personal modifications available to upper hive cultists are also far more advanced than what the lower classes can access. Where a manufactorum worker might have crude nerve augmentations performed by a cult chirurgeon in a back room, an upper hive noble can engage the services of renegade biosculptors and heretical tech adepts whose skills allow them to modify the human body with a precision and creativity that would horrify the Adeptus Mechanicus. And senses can be sharpened to superhuman levels with minimal visible alteration. Pleasure centers in the brain can be expanded and refined, allowing for the experience of emotional states that have no names in any human language. The body itself can be sculpted into forms that blur the line between art and anatomy, each modification both beautiful and disturbing in equal measure. The social dynamics within an upper hive cult are endlessly complex. Status is determined not by wealth or political power, though both are useful, but by the intensity and novelty of the experiences one can provide or endure. A cult member who creates a new sensation that no one in the group has experienced before gains enormous prestige. One who can endure an experience that drives others to tears of overwhelmed surrender is elevated in the hierarchy. Just the competitions that arise from this status system drive the cult's members to ever greater extremes, each trying to outdo the others in the pursuit of the unprecedented, each pushing the boundaries of what the human body and mind can contain. The meetings of an upper hive cult are planned with the same meticulous attention to detail that the Imperium brings to military campaigns. Weeks of preparation go into a single evening's gathering. The host selects a theme, an organizing principle around which the night's experiences will be structured. It might be a specific emotion, a particular sense, a concept drawn from philosophy or art, or some more esoteric discipline. Everything about the gathering, from the lighting to the temperature to the music to the substances consumed to the activities undertaken, it is designed to explore that theme with the thoroughness and creativity that only beings of enormous wealth and corrupted genius can bring to bear. The guest list is carefully curated. Each attendee brings something unique to the evening, a talent, a sensitivity, a physical quality that adds to the collective experience. New recruits are introduced gradually, their responses to each escalation carefully monitored and assessed. Those who show promise are encouraged. Those who show reluctance are given time and space, never pushed too hard too fast, because the surest way to lose a potential convert is to frighten them before the hook is set. Only when a recruit has been thoroughly seduced, when their desire for the experiences the cult provides has overridden their fear and their faith, are they introduced to the deeper mysteries of Slaanesh's worship. And what are those deeper mysteries? At the highest levels of an upper hive cult, the experiences on offer go beyond anything that can be achieved through physical sensation alone. Psychic communion with the Dark Prince, becomes possible for those whose minds have been opened by years of progressive corruption. Visions of the Palace of Pleasure, the legendary domain of Slaanesh at the heart of the warp, are granted as rewards for exceptional devotion. Some cultists develop minor psychic abilities, the power to sense the emotions of others, to project feelings of pleasure or pain, to perceive the warp as a living landscape of sensation that exists just beneath the surface of the material world. These abilities make them both more devoted and more dangerous, yet more useful to the cult and more likely to attract the attention of the Inquisition. The relationship between upper hive and lower hive cults is usually one of patronage and exploitation. The wealthy cultists provide resources, protection, and access to advanced modifications. The lower hive cultists provide labor, new recruits, and a buffer zone between the upper hive members and the authorities. It is a symbiotic relationship, but one in which the benefits are distributed unequally, much like the hive society that contains it. The lower hive cultists are aware of this inequality, but they accept it because the alternative, a return to the numbing grey existence of imperial life, is unthinkable. But there is one more layer to the hive, one more social stratum that has its own unique relationship with Slaanesh, the underhive. Met in the lightless depths, beneath the functional levels of the hive, where the structures of civilization have decayed into a maze of collapsed tunnels and repurposed waste, the worship of Slaanesh takes on its most extreme and most horrifying forms. The underhive cultists have no cover identities to maintain, no imperial authorities to deceive, no reason to exercise any restraint whatsoever. They have been driven underground by persecution, or have descended voluntarily, seeking a place where they can pursue their obsessions without interference. Down here, the cults are not secret societies. They are communities, entire populations of the devoted who have organized their collective existence around the worship of the Dark Prince. Yet the daily life of an underhive Slaaneshi cultist is one of almost total immersion in the sensory world of their god. The spaces they inhabit have been transformed beyond recognition, the industrial infrastructure of the collapsed hive levels, repurposed into vast, labyrinthine environments that assault the senses from every direction. Bioluminescent organisms have been cultivated to produce light in shifting, hypnotic patterns. Water systems have been redirected and treated with psychoactive compounds that turn every drink and every bath into an altered state. The air itself is a carefully managed cocktail of fragrances, pheromones, and chemical agents that keep the inhabitants in a state of perpetual heightened awareness. The leadership structures of underhive cults tend to be more overtly religious than their upper hive counterparts. But where the upper hive salons disguise their worship as social entertainment, the underhive communities have no need for such pretense. They have priests and priestesses, rituals and ceremonies, shrines and temples dedicated openly to the Dark Prince. The daily schedule revolves around acts of worship that encompass every aspect of life, from the preparation of food to the creation of art, to the resolution of disputes to the most intimate aspects of personal interaction. The physical environment of an underhive cult is deeply unsettling to an outsider. The modifications that the cult members have undergone are often extensive and visible: extrasensory organs, decorative mutations, surgical alterations that transform the human body into something that is simultaneously beautiful and deeply wrong. Yes, the art that covers every surface is vivid and disturbing, depicting scenes of ecstasy and agony that blur together until they are indistinguishable. The music that fills the air is constant and complex, layered compositions that change with the time of day and the mood of the community, guiding the emotional state of the inhabitants like a conductor leading an orchestra. The most disturbing aspect of underhive cult life, however, is the completeness of its transformation. Where upper hive and middle hive cultists still live partially in the world of the Imperium, the underhive communities have created their own world entirely. They have their own economy, based on the exchange of sensations and experiences rather than money. They have their own system of governance, usually centered on a council of the most advanced adepts whose sensitivity to the warp allows them to claim a direct connection to the will of Slaanesh. They have their own education system in which children born to the community are taught from birth to perceive the world through the lens of Slaaneshi philosophy, their senses deliberately enhanced and their minds shaped to seek pleasure in all things. The fate of these children is perhaps the most disturbing element of all. Born into a world of sensory overload and constant worship, they have never known any other way of life. They do not experience the transition from normalcy to corruption that their parents underwent. For them, the worship of Slaanesh is simply reality, the way the world works, as natural and unremarkable as gravity. They grow up with senses that have been enhanced from birth, perceptions that have been shaped since infancy, and a worldview in which the pursuit of sensation is not just acceptable, but holy. By the time they reach adulthood, many of them are so thoroughly integrated into the cult's way of life that they could not function in normal imperial society even if they wanted to. And all of this, from the solitary worker hiding scraps of silk in her hab block, to the underhive community that has created an entire alternative civilization, is just the mortal side of daily life under Slaanesh. Above and beyond, and through all of it, are the forces that most imperial citizens never see. The corrupted Astartes, the demonic servants, and the god itself, all of whom have their own daily existence in the service of excess. Let us ascend, then, as from the dark and perfumed corridors of the mortal world, and enter the far stranger realm of the Emperor's children. 10,000 years ago, the 3rd Legion of the Emperor's Space Marines was the pride of the Imperium. They bore the Emperor's own name and his personal sigil, the Palatine Aquila, a mark of distinction granted to no other legion. They were paragons of martial excellence and cultural refinement, warriors who were as comfortable discussing philosophy and creating art as they were breaking enemy lines on the battlefield. Their primarch, Fulgrim, was a being of almost supernatural charisma and physical perfection, a leader who inspired not merely obedience, but genuine adoration in everyone who met him. The story of how the Emperor's children fell to Slaanesh is one of the great tragedies of the Warhammer 40,000 universe, and it begins, as all Slaaneshi stories do, with the pursuit of perfection. Fulgrim was found on the world of Kimos, a dying mining planet whose population was slowly starving as their resources ran out. Even as an infant, the Primarch's abilities were extraordinary. He grew at an inhuman rate, both physically and intellectually, and by the time he was discovered by the Emperor and reunited with his legion, he had single-handedly transformed Kimos from a world on the brink of collapse into a thriving civilization. His drive for improvement was absolute. Everything he touched, he made better. Everything he saw, he strove to perfect. And this relentless pursuit of perfection, which was his greatest strength, became the handle by which chaos took hold of him and pulled him into the abyss. The turning point came on a world called Laren. The Emperor's children were tasked with bringing this serpentine alien species to compliance, and they accomplished the task with characteristic efficiency and ruthlessness. But in a temple on Laren's surface, Fulgrim discovered an artifact that would change the fate of his entire legion. A sword of alien manufacture, beautiful beyond description, its blade seeming to shift with colors that had no names. What Fulgrim did not know, what he could not know, was that this weapon was a prison for a greater demon of Slaanesh, a keeper of secrets that had been bound within the blade by the Layer's own sorcery. From the moment Fulgrim picked up the sword, the demon began to whisper to him, and the whispers found fertile soil in a mind already obsessed with the idea that perfection was always just one more step away. The corruption spread slowly at first. Fulgrim began to host elaborate feasts and celebrations aboard the Legion's flagship, the pride of the Emperor. The remembrancers, the artists and writers who accompanied the expeditionary fleets to document the Great Crusade were drawn into an increasingly decadent social scene that celebrated beauty, sensation, and the transgression of boundaries. Among them was a composer named Bekwa Kinska, a woman of extraordinary talent whose dissatisfaction with the limitations of conventional music made her particularly susceptible to the corruption that was already spreading through the fleet. Kinska had visited the Leia temple alongside many of the other remembrances, and the experience had planted something dark and hungry in her creative soul. Thus, she became obsessed with recreating the sounds she had heard there, sounds that existed at frequencies and in patterns that no human instrument could produce. She spent months designing new instruments, bizarre constructions that combined conventional technology with principles she did not fully understand, principles that had their origins in the warp itself. The result was a symphony she called the Maraviglia, and its premiere performance aboard the Pride of the Emperor was the moment when the Emperor's children crossed the point of no return. The instruments Kinska had created did not merely produce sound. They produced weaponized sensation, waves of psychic energy that tore through the audience like a physical force. As the symphony built to its climax, the barrier between real space and the warp thinned and then ripped open entirely. Daemonettes manifested among the audience. Chaos mutations erupted spontaneously through the crowd. The assembled Astartes and mortals, already primed by weeks of escalating decadence, were overwhelmed by a flood of sensation so intense that it obliterated every barrier of discipline and restraint they had ever possessed. What followed was a carnage of self-indulgence and violence that killed hundreds and corrupted thousands. And then, in the chaos that followed, several Emperor's children Astartes climbed onto the stage, took up the strange instruments, and discovered that they could channel the sonic energy into focused beams of destructive force. These were the first Noise Marines. Their creation was not the result of careful planning or deliberate corruption. It was a moment of spontaneous discovery. But a group of enhanced warriors finding in the midst of madness that the sounds they could produce with these alien instruments could tear flesh and shatter bone. The sheer sensation of wielding that kind of power, of feeling the scream of the instrument as it ripped through the air and the exhilarating shock of its impact on living matter, was enough to cement their devotion to Slaanesh in a single instant. 10,000 years have passed since the Maraviglia. 10,000 years in which the Emperor's children have descended further and further into obsession and excess. The daily life of a modern Emperor's children. Chaos Space Marine is almost incomprehensible to a mortal mind, because the modifications they have undergone, both surgical and demonic, have transformed them into beings whose relationship with sensation bears almost no resemblance to human experience. A noise. Marine's morning, if you can call it a morning. The concept of day and night has little meaning aboard a warship sailing through the warp. Begins with sound. Not the sound of an alarm or the ambient noise of a ship's systems, but the sound of the Marine's own armor, which has been integrated so thoroughly with sonic technology that it produces a constant, low-level vibration that the wearer can feel in their bones. This vibration is calibrated to specific frequencies that stimulate the pleasure centers of the Marine's brain, providing a baseline level of satisfaction that keeps the warrior functional between engagements. Without this baseline, the Noise Marine would fall into a state of sensory deprivation so severe that it could cause madness or death. The physical space in which an Emperor's children Marine lives is a reflection of their personal obsessions. And because the Emperor's children celebrate individuality and excess above all things, no two quarters are alike. Some are workshops filled with tools and materials for the creation of increasingly extreme sonic weapons or for the modification of their own bodies. Others are galleries, displaying collections of trophies and art that span 10 millennia of raiding and conquest. Still others are laboratories, where the Marine experiments with chemical compounds, biological agents, or psychic techniques that push the boundaries of sensation in new and previously unimagined directions. Thus, the armor of a Noise Marine is itself a work of art, a constantly evolving canvas that reflects the wearer's aesthetic preferences and stage of corruption. The original purple and gold of the 3rd Legion has been replaced, or more accurately augmented, with riot patterns of pink, black, and electric blue. Each Marine's armor a unique expression of their personality. Speakers and amplifiers are integrated into every surface, turning the Marine into a walking concert hall that can project sound at volumes capable of shattering ceramite plate. The helmet has been modified to enhance hearing to a degree that would overwhelm any unmodified brain, and the neural pathways that process auditory information have been surgically expanded and demonically enhanced to handle the input. Between battles, the Emperor's children engage in pursuits that would be recognizable to their mortal counterparts in the cults, but amplified to a degree that reflects their superhuman physiology and 10,000 years of experience. They create art of astonishing complexity, paintings that incorporate psychoactive pigments, sculptures that generate emotional fields, musical compositions that exist partially in the warp and partially in real space. They modify their bodies and their weapons in an endless pursuit of perfection, each alteration designed to unlock some new capability or experience. They engage in elaborate social rituals that serve as both worship and entertainment, competitions of skill, creativity, and endurance that can last for days or weeks. The competitive nature of the Emperor's children is one of their defining characteristics. And where other Chaos Space Marine legions might maintain some form of traditional military hierarchy, the Emperor's children are organized around a constantly shifting web of rivalries and alliances, in which status is determined by the ability to create, experience, or endure sensations that no one else can match. A warrior who perfects a new technique with their sonic weapon gains prestige. One who acquires a particularly exquisite trophy from a defeated enemy is celebrated. One who undergoes a modification so extreme that it would kill a lesser being is revered. This competition drives the Legion's continuous evolution, pushing each Marine to greater and greater extremes in the pursuit of novelty and perfection. It also drives a significant amount of internal conflict as rivals sabotage each other's experiments, steal each other's creations, and engage in duels that are as much performances as they are battles. These duels are elaborate affairs, fought with weapons chosen for their aesthetic qualities as much as their lethality, in arenas decorated with art and filled with music, before audiences of fellow Marines who critique every move with the informed judgment of beings who have spent millennia studying the art of combat. And through it all, the sound never stops. The Emperor's children exist in a constant symphony of noise, a layered composition of weapons tests, modified engines, amplified heartbeats, screaming victims, and music that is being composed and performed and destroyed and recomposed in real time by Marines whose creative drives have been supercharged by 10,000 years of Slaaneshi devotion. To a mortal ear, it would sound like the end of the world. To a noise Marine, it sounds like home. The relationship between art and war in the Emperor's children is not metaphorical, it is literal. For these corrupted Astartes, combat is the highest form of artistic expression, and the preparation for battle is indistinguishable from the preparation for a performance. Weapons are tuned to specific frequencies, each Marine calibrating their sonic arsenal to produce sounds that complement those of their squad mates, creating a wall of sound that is both devastating and, to Slaanesh-attuned ears, beautiful. Armor is polished and decorated. Poses are practiced. The advance into enemy fire is choreographed, each Marine moving with a dancer's grace through a killing field that they have transformed into a stage. But the experience of combat for a noise Marine is almost indescribable. Their enhanced senses process the battlefield at speeds that make time seem to slow. Every detail is vivid to the point of hallucination. The colors of bolt rounds exploding against armor, the texture of the ground beneath their boots, the smell of blood and ozone and scorched metal, the sound of every weapon, every scream, every heartbeat in a quarter-mile radius. All of it is experienced with a clarity and intensity that would reduce an unmodified human to a gibbering wreck. But the noise Marine does not merely experience these sensations. They relish them. They critique them. They compose them into a mental narrative that elevates the chaos of battle into something approaching an artistic masterpiece. When a noise marine fires their sonic blaster, or the weapon produces a blast of concentrated sound that can vibrate a human body to pieces at the molecular level. But to the marine, the act of firing is not merely a tactical decision. It is a musical note, a contribution to the symphony of destruction that the squad is collectively composing. The pitch, duration, and direction of each blast are chosen not only for their tactical effectiveness, but for their aesthetic contribution to the overall soundscape. The best noise marines, the ones whose skills have been honed over millennia, can conduct an entire battle like a maestro leading an orchestra, directing the fire of their squad to create patterns of sound that are as complex and deliberate as any concert hall performance. This is why the Emperor's children are so terrifying to fight against. They are not merely trying to kill you. They are trying to make your death beautiful. And there is something profoundly disturbing about facing an enemy who views your suffering as a creative medium, who will take the time to ensure that every cut is placed with artistic precision, who will modify their approach mid-engagement, not because their strategy is failing, but because they have thought of a more elegant way to achieve the same result. But the mortal realm and the battlefields of real space are not the only places where daily life under Slaanesh unfolds. Beyond the material universe, in the roiling, emotion-driven dimension known as the warp, lies a realm so strange and so seductive that merely knowing of its existence has been enough to drive men mad. The Palace of Slaanesh, the domain of the Dark Prince, is the ultimate destination of every Slaaneshi soul, thus the promised paradise that every cultist dreams of and every demon calls home. And what happens there, on a daily basis, if such a concept can even be applied to a dimension where time is a suggestion rather than a law, is perhaps the most fascinating and the most horrifying aspect of life under the youngest chaos god. The Palace of Slaanesh is not a building, though the word palace suggests one. It is a realm unto itself, a vast and constantly shifting landscape of desire and temptation that exists at the heart of Slaanesh's domain in the warp. It is surrounded by 6 concentric rings, each one a domain dedicated to one of the 6 deadly seductions that form the pillars of Slaanesh's philosophy. These rings are not merely defensive barriers, though they serve that function. They are expressions of the god's nature, are physical manifestations of the desires that fuel Slaanesh's power, and each one is home to countless souls who have been drawn in and trapped by their own inability to resist what the ring offers. The first ring is the circle of avidity. To enter Slaanesh's domain from the warp is to find yourself in a landscape of impossible wealth. Mountains of gold and jewels stretch to horizons that seem impossibly far away. Treasure chests overflow with artifacts of breathtaking craftsmanship. Weapons of legendary power lie scattered on the ground as if discarded by beings who had no use for them. Every object that you have ever coveted, every possession you have ever wished for, is here, waiting to be picked up and claimed. The air itself seems to shimmer with promise, and the ground beneath your feet is soft and warm, as if the very earth is welcoming you home. But every treasure is a trap. To touch any object in the circle of avidity is to be consumed by the desire for more. The moment your fingers close around a golden coin, you find that there is a larger coin just a few steps away, and beyond that, a chest of diamonds, and beyond that, a crown of purest adamantine. Each treasure leads to the next, in an endless chain of escalating desire, and the traveler who gives in finds themselves walking forever through mountains of wealth, reaching and grasping and never being satisfied, until they collapse and are absorbed into the landscape itself, becoming just another jewel in the collection, another piece of treasure waiting to tempt the next visitor. Those who have the strength of will to pass through the circle of avidity, without touching anything, find themselves in the second ring, the circle of gluttony. Here, the landscape transforms into an endless feast. Tables stretch in every direction, laden with foods and drinks of every conceivable variety. The smells alone are enough to make a mortal weep with desire, rich and complex aromas that promise flavors beyond anything the physical universe can produce. The food is warm and inviting, steam rising from dishes that have been prepared by chefs whose skills are beyond mortal comprehension. Goblets overflow with wines and spirits that seem to glow with an inner light, their colors deep and vivid and impossibly appealing. And once again, to partake is to be lost. And a single bite of food in the circle of gluttony triggers a hunger so vast and so consuming that the eater cannot stop. They eat and eat and eat, the food never diminishing, the hunger never abating, until their physical form begins to change, bloating and distorting as the excess they are consuming transforms them into something that is no longer recognizably human. They become permanent residents of the circle, living monuments to their own appetite, still eating, still hungry, still reaching for the next morsel, even as their bodies have been stretched and twisted beyond all natural limits. The third ring is the circle of carnality, and this is where the temptation becomes most personal. The landscape here is shaped by the deepest desires of the traveler's heart. Whatever they long for most, whatever secret yearning they carry buried in the innermost chambers of their soul, it is here, made manifest in flesh and form and waiting for them with open arms. For some, it is a lost love returned to life. For others, it is a version of themselves that is everything they have always wanted to be. For still others, it is something stranger, a sensation, a connection, a communion that they have felt the absence of their entire lives without ever being able to name what they were missing. The fourth ring, the circle of paramountcy, appeals to the desire for power. Here, the traveler is greeted by roars of adulation from vast crowds, by the sight of armies pledging their loyalty, by the sensation of absolute and unquestioned authority over everything they survey. Every mortal dream of dominion is offered freely. And the temptation is to accept, to sit upon the throne that appears from nowhere, and to rule the multitudes that kneel before it. Those who do find that the power is real, for a moment, before the crowds turn hungry, and the loyalty becomes chains, and the throne becomes a prison from which there is no escape. The fifth ring, the circle of vainglory, is perhaps the most subtle of all. Here, the traveler is confronted with their own reflection, but perfected. They see themselves as they have always wished to be, every flaw corrected, every weakness eliminated, every virtue amplified to its maximum expression. They are beautiful, strong, wise, talented, loved, admired, everything they have ever aspired to be, staring back at them from a mirror that seems to pulse with warm, inviting light. To feel even a flicker of pride at this reflection, as to think, even for a moment, yes, this is who I truly am, is to be trapped. The mirror becomes a cage of narcissistic obsession, the viewer unable to look away from the perfected image of themselves, unable to accept that the reality is anything less than the reflection. The sixth and final ring, the circle of indolency, is the most dangerous because it is the most mundane. After surviving the temptations of greed, appetite, desire, power, and vanity, the traveler arrives in a place that seems, at first glance, like a simple, peaceful meadow. The grass is soft, the air is warm, the light is gentle. There are no treasures, no feasts, no seductive figures, no adoring crowds, no flattering mirrors. There is only peace and rest, and the overwhelming sensation of safety and contentment. Yet for a traveler who has just endured the assault of 5 successive rings of temptation, this sixth ring is almost irresistible. The desire to simply sit down, to close one's eyes, to rest for just a moment in this gentle, quiet place, is so powerful that it takes a will of adamantine to refuse it. And those who give in, those who allow themselves even a second of relaxation, fall into a coma from which there is no awakening. They dream, and their dreams are pleasant, and they never open their eyes again. Their bodies become part of the landscape, peaceful figures resting eternally in the soft grass, their expressions serene, their minds lost in blissful oblivion. Beyond the 6 circles lies the palace itself. And if the circles are traps, the palace is the bait. It is described by the vanishingly small number of beings who have reached it and returned to tell the tale as a structure of impossible beauty. Its towers seem to be made of crystallized light. Its walls pulse with a warmth that suggests something alive. Its doorways are always open, always inviting, and the sounds that drift from within are sweet enough to make the stars themselves lean closer to listen. Within the palace, the demons of Slaanesh hold court. Daemonettes glide through hallways that shift and change according to the mood of their master. Fiends of Slaanesh roam the grounds in packs, hunting for entertainment as much as sustenance. Keepers of secrets, the greater demons of Slaanesh, preside over gatherings of such elaborate depravity that they make the most extreme mortal cult rituals look like children's birthday parties. And at the center of it all, on a throne that exists in every dimension simultaneously, and that radiates a beauty so intense that no mortal can look upon it without losing their soul, sits Slaanesh. The daily life of a demon in the palace of Slaanesh is one of constant performance and constant competition. Daemonettes, the most numerous of Slaanesh's servants, spend their existence creating and participating in an endless series of displays designed to win the Dark Prince's attention and favor. They dance, and their dances are weapons that can kill with beauty. They sing, and their songs can seduce souls across the barriers between dimensions. They fight, and their combat is a graceful, lethal art form that blurs the line between murder and choreography, the greatest among them. The handmaidens who are permitted to approach Slaanesh's throne itself have achieved a level of artistry in these pursuits that is beyond the comprehension of mortal minds. The competition for Slaanesh's favor is ferocious and constant. Demons who fail to entertain or who become predictable are cast down, their forms dissolved and reformed into something lesser. Those who succeed are elevated, gaining power and prestige that allows them greater freedom to pursue their own creative visions. The hierarchy of the palace is fluid and mercurial, reflecting the nature of the god it serves, and a demon who is the Dark Prince's favorite one day might find themselves forgotten the next, replaced by a newer, more creative rival. The 6 great halls within the palace correspond to the 6 circles outside it, and within each hall, the excesses of the corresponding seduction are pursued to their absolute extremes. In the Hall of Avidity, demons compete to create the most desirable objects, artifacts of such beauty and power that the desire they inspire can be felt across the warp. In the Hall of Gluttony, feasts are prepared using ingredients that do not exist in the physical universe, dishes that nourish the soul rather than the body, and that create hungers no mortal food could ever satisfy. In the Hall of Carnality, performances take place that would shatter the mind of any mortal witness. The other halls are equally extreme in their own ways, each one dedicated to pushing its particular vice beyond any limit that reality would otherwise impose. And through it all, Slaanesh watches. The Dark Prince is not a distant, aloof deity. Slaanesh is an active participant in the life of the palace, an audience, a patron, a critic, and a predator all at once. The god's attention is the ultimate reward and the ultimate danger, because to be noticed by Slaanesh is to be consumed by a regard so intense that it can reshape reality around the subject of its focus. Demons who catch the Dark Prince's eye are often transformed in the moment, their forms altered by the god's whim to reflect whatever quality caught its attention, for better or worse. Beyond the palace and the demon worlds, there are the champions, the mortal beings who have risen so high in Slaanesh's service that they have been granted power beyond anything that flesh and blood can normally contain. These are the demon princes, the chosen, the blessed and the cursed, and beings who have walked the path of excess to its ultimate conclusion and emerged, transformed but not destroyed, as living embodiments of their god's philosophy. The most famous of these champions is, of course, Fulgrim himself. The Primarch of the Emperor's children, once the most beautiful and the most ambitious of the Emperor's 20 sons, is now a demon prince of Slaanesh, a four-armed serpentine being of staggering power and disturbing beauty. His exact whereabouts in the current era are a matter of speculation and rumor. Some say he resides on a demon world of his own creation, a place that he has shaped into his personal vision of paradise, where every surface, every sound, every sensation has been calibrated to his exact specifications. Others say he wanders the warp, visiting the palace of Slaanesh as a favored guest, engaging in contests of artistry and excess with the keepers of secrets, always seeking the next experience that will satisfy a hunger that has been growing for 10,000 years. The daily life of a demon primarch is difficult to define because the concept of a day, with its implication of a regular cycle of activity and rest, has little meaning for a being who exists outside the constraints of normal time. Fulgrim does not sleep. He does not eat, at least not in the conventional sense, though he does consume, taking in the psychic energy of sensation and emotion the way a mortal takes in food. He does not rest, because rest implies a state of inactivity, and for a being whose every moment is an opportunity for experience, inactivity is a concept that no longer applies. What Fulgrim does, and according to the fragmentary accounts that have filtered back to the Imperium through captured cultists and the confessions of turned heretics, is create. He sculpts worlds. He composes symphonies that span galaxies. He paints with the stuff of reality itself, using warp energy as his medium and the emotions of living beings as his palette. His creations are said to be of such extraordinary beauty and such profound horror that the few mortals who have glimpsed them have been changed forever, some driven to madness, others to a state of ecstatic devotion that transcends anything achievable through conventional worship. And then there is Lucius the Eternal, the soul thief, Fulgrim's champion, the most feared duelist in the galaxy. Lucius's daily life is defined entirely by a single, terrible gift bestowed upon him by Slaanesh. Why, he cannot truly die. Oh, he can be killed, his body can be destroyed, his heart can stop beating. But anyone who kills Lucius and feels even the slightest moment of pride or satisfaction in having done so will find themselves changing. Over the course of days or weeks, the killer's body transforms, their skin pushing up in ridges that form the maze of scars that Lucius wears across his face and chest, their identity dissolving as Lucius's consciousness reasserts itself within their flesh. When the transformation is complete, Lucius lives again, and his killer has become nothing more than one of the many screaming faces that decorate his armor, trapped for eternity in the writhing metal, aware but unable to do anything but suffer. This curse, this gift, defines Lucius's existence. He wanders the galaxy seeking the greatest warriors he can find, challenging them to combat, relishing both the thrill of the fight and the absolute certainty that, win or lose, he will endure. He has died more times than he can remember. He has been killed by space marines, by Drukhari archons, by demon-possessed plague champions, even by a Necron duelist whose body of living metal could not resist the curse, because even a machine mind could not help taking cold pride in its victory. Each death is an experience, a new sensation to be catalogued and savored. Each rebirth is a reminder of Slaanesh's favor and of the terrible price that favor extracts. Lucius's daily routine, when he is not actively engaged in hunting a worthy opponent, is one of relentless self-improvement. He practices his swordsmanship for hours at a time, perfecting techniques that have been honed over 10,000 years of constant combat. He maintains his weapons with a devotion that borders on worship, the blade of the layer that he now carries, and the lash of torment that serves as both weapon and instrument of punishment. He meditates, though his meditation is nothing like the disciplined, inward-focused practice of a loyal Astartes. Lucius's meditation is a systematic review of every duel he has ever fought, replaying each one in perfect detail, analyzing every movement, every mistake, every moment of transcendent perfection, seeking always the lesson that will make the next fight more perfect than the last. he also collects. The faces in his armor are not merely decorative. They are trophies, records of conquest, and Lucius takes great care in arranging and maintaining them. Yet new faces are positioned according to a system that only Lucius understands. Their screaming features fitted into the overall pattern of the armor's design, like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle that will never be complete. Some say that Lucius talks to them, holding conversations with the trapped souls of his victims as a way of reliving the pleasure of their defeat. Others say that the faces talk to him, whispering constantly in voices that only Lucius can hear, a chorus of anguish that provides a constant, soothing backdrop of sensation. The broader community of Slaaneshi champions and demon princes beyond these famous figures is vast and varied. Each one has their own obsession, their own art, their own interpretation of the Dark Prince's philosophy. There are champions who have devoted centuries to the perfection of a single dish. It's a meal so exquisite that the act of eating it is said to be a religious experience, even for beings who no longer require food. There are demon princes who have transformed entire worlds into living instruments, planets whose geological processes produce sounds that can be heard in the warp. There are warlords who have turned warfare itself into an art form, so refined that their campaigns are studied by both Imperial and Chaos strategists as masterworks of tactical creativity. The demon world of Oliensis provides a particularly vivid example of the extremes that daily life under Slaanesh can reach. Oliensis is not a planet in any conventional sense. It is a colossal, morbidly obese humanoid figure, curled into a fetal position, drifting through the eye of terror. The surface of this planet-sized being is home to communities of hedonistic beastmen and noise marines who live in and among the folds and crevices of the creature's flesh. The noise marines occupy the creature's pores, using them as natural amphitheaters for their sonic performances. During the Abyssal Crusade, an entire Space Marine chapter, the Sentinels, invaded Oliensis. They slaughtered the beastmen and fought the noise marines. But the violence of their engagement eventually woke the planet itself, which devoured the combatants. The surviving Sentinels, trapped inside the creature's body, were eventually forced into cannibalism to survive and re-emerged centuries later as the corrupted Corpus Brethren. Similarly, the hive world of Dural was transformed when the Hadex anomaly washed over it and Slaanesh claimed the planet. The hive city of Hive Primus was transformed from stone and steel into living flesh. The unfortunate residents, whose habitations were on the outer edges, found themselves being drawn into the walls, their bodies becoming the mortar of this new, living structure. Their mouths were positioned facing inward, so that all within could hear their sounds of agony and ecstasy. The upper spires became dens of decadence. The middle hive became a gathering place of open worship. The lower levels became something that no imperial report has adequately described, though the fragments that exist suggest experiences that stretch the limits of human language. These demon worlds represent the end state of daily life under Slaanesh writ large. They are what happens when Slaanesh's influence is given free rein without any opposing force to check it. The daily life of their inhabitants, if it can be called life, is one of total immersion in sensation. There are no routines, because routine implies predictability, and predictability is the antithesis of everything Slaanesh represents. There are no rest periods, because the modified flesh and demonically sustained bodies of the inhabitants do not require rest in the conventional sense. There is only experience, endless and escalating, sensation piled upon sensation, until the concept of a distinct, individual existence becomes meaningless, and the inhabitant is absorbed into the collective consciousness of a world that exists solely to feel. There is another dimension to the daily life of Slaanesh's followers that we have not yet explored, and it is one that often gets overlooked in favor of the more sensational aspects of the Dark Prince's worship. I am talking about the pursuit of perfection as a discipline. Because while much of what we have discussed centers on pleasure and sensation, Slaanesh is not merely a god of indulgence. The Dark Prince is also, and perhaps more fundamentally, a god of obsession. An obsession in its purest form, is not about feeling good. It is about the relentless, consuming, all-encompassing drive to be the absolute best at whatever you have chosen to be the best at. Consider the warrior devotee of Slaanesh, who does not care about music or art or cuisine, but who cares, with every fiber of their being, about the art of the blade. For this individual, daily life under Slaanesh is not a parade of sensory indulgence. It is a monastic existence of practice and refinement that would make even the most disciplined imperial swordmaster look like a casual hobbyist. They wake and they train. They eat food chosen not for its flavor, but for its nutritional efficiency, because every calorie must serve the body's ability to perform at its peak. They study their own movements with a critical eye that misses nothing, that notices when a thrust is 1 millimeter off center, and spends the next 6 hours correcting that error. They analyze the fighting styles of every opponent they have ever faced, breaking each one down into component techniques and developing counters that are themselves works of tactical art. This kind of Slaaneshi devotee is in some ways more dangerous than the pleasure-seeking hedonist, because their corruption is hidden beneath a veneer of discipline and focus that can easily be mistaken for the virtues that the Imperium prizes most highly. A warrior seeking perfection in combat does not look like a heretic. They look like an exemplary soldier. They are promoted, praised, held up as an example to others. And all the while, the obsession that drives them is eating away at the boundaries of their humanity, pushing them toward acts of progressively greater extremity in the pursuit of the flawless kill, the perfect parry, the transcendent moment of combat, where everything aligns and the blade becomes an extension of the soul itself. This is how Slaanesh corrupts the most unlikely of targets. Not through temptation, but through amplification. The god does not need to change what you care about. The god merely needs to make you care about it more, much more, until the caring itself becomes the corruption and the pursuit of excellence becomes an end in itself that justifies any means necessary to achieve it. The flawless host, a warband of chaos space marines descended from the Emperor's children, embodies this aspect of Slaanesh worship in its purest form. These warriors are not hedonists in the conventional sense. They do not spend their days between battles in drug-fueled revels or sensory overload chambers. Instead, they spend every waking moment perfecting their combat skills, drilling and sparring and analyzing and refining with an intensity that goes beyond dedication and into the realm of mania. They believe that the perfect fight, the fight in which every movement is exactly right, every decision is exactly timed, every blow lands with exactly the force necessary to achieve exactly the intended effect, is the highest form of worship that can be offered to the Dark Prince. And they are always, always pursuing that perfect fight, knowing that they will never achieve it, knowing that the pursuit itself is the point. Their daily routine aboard their warships is structured with an almost mechanical regularity that would surprise anyone who expects Slaaneshi worshippers to be undisciplined libertines. They wake at the same time each day. They begin with stretching and physical conditioning routines that have been optimized over centuries for the specific demands of their preferred fighting styles. They move into weapons drills, each Marine practicing their specialty for hours at a time, every repetition accompanied by a mental critique so detailed and so merciless that it would crush the ego of any being less driven. They spar with each other in bouts that are recorded and analyzed afterward, every frame dissected for evidence of imperfection, every flaw catalogued and addressed in the next training session. Meals are taken efficiently, with the food selected and prepared according to recipes that have been refined over millennia to provide the optimal balance of nutrients for a transhuman body engaged in constant high-intensity training. There is no indulgence in the food itself, no attention to flavor or presentation. The flawless host eat to fuel their bodies, nothing more. The indulgence, the pleasure, the worship is reserved entirely for the act of combat, and they will accept no substitutes. As when the flawless host goes to war, the effect of this relentless training is immediately apparent. They fight with a speed and precision that makes even other Chaos Space Marines pause in admiration or fear. Their movements are fluid, economical, and devastatingly effective, each Marine functioning as an individual artist, creating their contribution to a collective masterwork of violence. The enemy is not merely defeated, but disassembled, taken apart, with a clinical efficiency that is simultaneously horrible and, in its own terrible way, beautiful. And this is the full spectrum of what it means to live under Slaanesh. It is not just the orgies and the drugs and the screaming music. It is also the cold, focused, relentless pursuit of excellence that drives beings to push themselves beyond all reasonable limits and then keep pushing because the concept of enough has been purged from their vocabulary. It is the sculptor who chips away at a block of stone for decades because the figure inside is not yet perfect. It is the musician who plays until their fingers are nothing but exposed bone because the note they are seeking has not yet been found. It is the warrior who fights 1,000 duels in search of the one that will be flawless. All of them serve Slaanesh. All of them feed the Dark Prince's hunger, and all of them are trapped in a spiral of obsession that will end either in apotheosis or in ruin. The way this corruption spreads through institutional structures is particularly insidious. As consider a planetary defense force on a typical Imperial world. The commanding officer is a dedicated servant of the Emperor, a soldier of proven loyalty and genuine skill. But she has a weakness that she does not recognize as a weakness because the Imperium has taught her to value it. She cares deeply about the performance of her troops. She wants them to be the best. She pushes them hard in training, drives them to exceed their limits, and takes great pride when they perform well in combat. This is, by Imperial standards, admirable. It is exactly what a commanding officer should do. But there is a point where dedication becomes obsession, and obsession becomes something else entirely. When the commanding officer begins to see casualties, not as tragedies, but as data points in an optimization problem. When she starts to modify training routines, not to improve survival rates, but to produce more aesthetically pleasing combat performances. When she begins to select her soldiers, not for their loyalty or their courage, but for their physical grace and their ability to execute maneuvers with mathematical precision. When the parade ground inspections become less about readiness and more about the visual beauty of perfectly synchronized movement. When the after-action reports stop focusing on objectives achieved and start describing the elegance of particular engagements with a reverence that borders on the poetic. None of these individual changes is dramatic enough to trigger an alarm. Each one seems like a natural extension of the last, a slight deepening of an existing tendency rather than a fundamental change in character. But taken together, they represent a transformation so complete that by the time anyone realizes what has happened, the commanding officer is no longer serving the Emperor. She is serving an aesthetic ideal that has its roots not in Imperial doctrine, but in the philosophy of the Dark Prince. Her troops, trained to perfection and drilled to exhaustion, have become instruments of art as much as instruments of war. And when Slaanesh finally makes contact, when the whisper becomes audible, when the commanding officer feels the Dark Prince's attention fall upon her like warm sunlight on cold skin, she does not recoil. She leans in, because the Dark Prince is offering her the one thing the Imperium never could, the promise that perfection is achievable, that the perfect army, the perfect battle, the perfect kill, as is not a distant ideal, but a real, tangible possibility that she can reach if she is only willing to push a little further. This pattern of institutional corruption is repeated across every level of Imperial society. Artisan guilds whose dedication to craftsmanship slides into an unhealthy obsession with flawlessness. Medical practitioners whose commitment to healing evolves into a fascination with the limits of the human body. Administratum clerks whose love of order and efficiency becomes a mania for the perfect system, the perfect procedure, the perfect form. In every case, the corruption follows the same trajectory, from admirable dedication through excessive commitment, through obsessive pursuit, to the point where the pursuit itself becomes more important than its stated goal, and the practitioner realizes, with a thrill of recognition, that they mistake for revelation, that the destination was never the point. The journey is the point. The striving is the point. The constant, relentless, never-ending pursuit of something just a little bit better than what you have now. That is Slaanesh. That is the Dark Prince's gift and the Dark Prince's curse. That is daily life under the Lord of Excess, stripped of its theatrical trappings and reduced to its most essential and most devastating truth. There is a passage from the forbidden texts of the Cult of the Sacred Union that encapsulates this truth with a clarity that would be poetic if it were not so damning. It reads, in part, "Embrace your hunger, your desire. The universe is ours for the taking. Let every person follow their every desire, satisfy their every hunger, and deny themselves no adventure. For it is in these things and in others that you will find the greatest pleasure, and it is through these things and through each other that you shall rise higher." The appeal of these words is obvious. They speak to something fundamental in the mortal condition, the desire for more, for better, for the fulfillment of potential that every sentient being carries within them like a seed waiting for rain. And the horror of these words is equally obvious, because they contain no limit, no boundary, no suggestion that there is a point at which enough is enough. They are an invitation to walk a road that has no destination and no end, only an ever-steepening incline that will eventually become a cliff. Let us also consider something that rarely gets discussed when people talk about life under Slaanesh, and that is the experience of those who do not choose this path. The bystanders, the collateral damage, the imperial citizens who live next door to a Slaaneshi cult and have no idea that their neighbors' increasingly erratic behavior is the result of demonic corruption rather than ordinary eccentricity. The family members who watch someone they love change in ways they cannot understand, becoming increasingly distant, increasingly obsessed with things that seem trivial, increasingly unwilling to participate in the normal routines of life. The children who grow up in households where one or both parents have been touched by the Dark Prince's influence and who absorb, by osmosis, a worldview that subtly undermines every value the Imperium has taught them to hold dear. These people are the invisible victims of Slaanesh's influence. They're the ones whose stories are never told because they are not dramatic enough to make the history books. They do not fall to chaos in a blaze of corruption and mutation. They simply live in the shadow of it, their lives quietly distorted by forces they cannot see and cannot understand. The parent who cannot explain why their child's drawings have started to contain patterns that make the viewer feel vaguely uneasy. The spouse who cannot understand why their partner no longer seems satisfied with anything, why every meal is criticized, every gift rejected, every attempt at connection met with a distant, evaluating stare that seems to be measuring them against some standard they cannot comprehend. The Inquisition's files contain thousands of reports about these cases, the collateral human damage of Slaaneshi corruption. In many instances, the family members and associates of cult members are themselves examined and sometimes detained, subjected to rigorous testing for signs of corruption. Some are cleared and released, their lives disrupted but not destroyed. Others are found to carry trace contamination, subtle changes in their neurological function that suggest exposure to Slaanesh's influence without full conversion. These individuals are typically sterilized and relocated to penal worlds, a punishment that seems disproportionate until you consider that the alternative, allowing potentially compromised individuals to remain in the general population, carries risks that the Inquisition considers unacceptable. And then there are the worlds that fall entirely. The civilizations that are consumed from within by Slaanesh's influence, not through military invasion or demonic incursion, but through the slow, patient, beautiful corruption of their culture. These events, which the Inquisition classifies as societal collapse events, follow a pattern that is by now depressingly familiar. The corruption begins in the upper classes, where wealth and leisure provide the opportunity for indulgence. It spreads through the cultural institutions, the arts, the entertainment industry, the educational system, each one becoming a vector for ideas and experiences that gradually erode the population's resistance to excess. It penetrates the governing structures, corrupting the leaders who should be guarding against it. And finally, it reaches a tipping point. At a moment when the corrupted elements of the society outnumber the uncorrupted, and the entire civilization tips over the edge into unrestrained hedonism. The fall of the Eldari is the most famous example of this pattern, but it is far from the only one. Countless human worlds have suffered the same fate on a smaller scale, their populations consumed by pleasure cults that grew from harmless social clubs into civilization-destroying forces in the space of a few generations. The hive world of Destra 4 saw Slaaneshi cults infiltrate the populace to such an extent that normal life became impossible, with violent riots erupting as competing cults clashed for dominance in a grotesque parody of religious war. The pleasure world of Lysera, once a paradise for the imperial elite, was consumed from within when its artistic community fell under the influence of a Slaanesh cult that promised divine creative inspiration and delivered demonic possession instead. These are the large-scale manifestations of what begins, always, with the small, with the scrap of silk, with the stolen moment of beauty, with the first tentative step on a road that the walker does not yet know has no end. And that brings us to perhaps the most profound question that the existence of Slaanesh raises about the Warhammer 40,000 universe. Is the Imperium's response to the threat of Slaanesh, its absolute prohibition of pleasure, its doctrine of suffering as virtue, its systematic suppression of beauty and art and joy, actually effective? Or does it, by creating the conditions of deprivation that make Slaanesh's whisper so irresistible, and actually serve the Dark Prince's purposes better than any cult could? This is a question that no character within the setting can answer, because to even ask it is to risk heresy. But it hangs in the air like the scent of forbidden incense, and it gives the story of Slaanesh its terrible, tragic depth. Because in the end, the daily life under Slaanesh is not just a horror story about an evil god and its corrupted followers. It is a story about what happens when sentient beings are denied the experiences that give life meaning, and about the lengths to which they will go, the prices they will pay, the souls they will sacrifice, for just one taste of something more. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But there is also desire, and beauty, and music that can shatter worlds, and a God who sits at the center of it all, as on a throne made of every unfulfilled wish and every abandoned dream, and smiles and waits and whispers. And somewhere, in a hablock in a middle hive on a world whose name does not matter, a young woman finds a scrap of silk, and the story begins again. We should also talk about the dark mirror that the Drukhari hold up to the idea of daily life under Slaanesh, because their existence is in many ways the opposite side of the same coin. The Drukhari, the Dark Eldar who dwell in the impossible webway city of Komorragh, are not worshippers of Slaanesh. They are, in fact, the beings in the galaxy who have the most reason to fear and despise the Dark Prince. Because Slaanesh was born from their ancestors' indulgence, and the debt that was incurred in that birth has never been paid, the Dark Prince holds a claim on every Eldari soul, and for the Drukhari, who do not use spirit stones to protect themselves the way their Craftworld cousins do, that claim is being collected in real time. Their souls are slowly being drained away, sipped by Slaanesh like wine from an endlessly refilling glass. The daily life of a Drukhari is therefore defined by a desperate, constant need to replenish the soul energy that Slaanesh is consuming. And the only way they have found to do this is through the suffering of others. The pain and anguish of their victims acts as a substitute fuel, temporarily staving off the Dark Prince's hunger and restoring a measure of vitality to their withering souls. This means that the Drukhari must inflict suffering constantly, not as a luxury, but as a biological necessity. A Drukhari who goes too long without causing pain begins to age, as their features growing haggard and drawn, their vitality fading, until eventually they are nothing but a hollow shell, drained of everything that made them alive. Imagine that as your daily reality. Imagine waking each morning and knowing that if you do not cause someone else to suffer today, you will be one step closer to a fate worse than death. Imagine building an entire civilization around this requirement, a city of spires and arenas and torture chambers, where the infliction of pain has been elevated to an art form, where the scream of a victim is the most valued currency, where every social interaction is colored by the knowledge that everyone around you is in the same desperate situation, feeding on each other's misery in an endless cycle of predation that has no purpose beyond simple survival. The arenas of Komarach, where gladiatorial combat and elaborate tortures are performed before audiences of hundreds of thousands, are not entertainment in the way that an imperial citizen might understand entertainment. They are feeding stations. The spectators absorb the suffering of the combatants and the victims through a psychic mechanism that the Drukhari call the thirst, a hunger that can only be temporarily sated and never permanently cured. The best arena performances, those that produce the most intense and sustained suffering, are valued not for their aesthetic qualities, though the Drukhari are nothing if not aesthetes, but for their nourishing power, the ability to push back the encroaching hunger of Slaanesh for a few more hours or days. This is what makes the Drukhari's relationship with daily life under Slaanesh so tragically ironic. Oh, they are not worshippers of the Dark Prince. They are victims of the Dark Prince, trapped in a cycle of cruelty and consumption that was imposed on them by the sins of their ancestors. But the cycle itself, the constant pursuit of more intense suffering, the escalating extremity of the tortures they inflict, the obsessive refinement of their methods, mirrors the spiral of excess that defines Slaanesh worship among humans. The Drukhari have become, in their desperate flight from the god that hunts them, almost indistinguishable from the very devotees they despise. They are living proof that Slaanesh's influence extends beyond mere worship, shaping even those who reject the Dark Prince into instruments of the very excess they are trying to escape. And there are whispers in the darkest corners of Komarach, of Drukhari, who have given up the fight entirely, who have stopped running from Slaanesh and have instead turned to face the Dark Prince with open arms. These fallen Drukhari form secret cults within the Dark City, worshipping the very being that their entire civilization was built to resist. They believe that surrender is preferable to the endless, exhausting cycle of cruelty that their existence demands, that it is better to embrace the hunger than to spend eternity trying to outrun it. Their daily lives are a bizarre fusion of Drukhari culture and Slaaneshi devotion, combining the refined sadism of the Dark City with the ecstatic hedonism of the Dark Prince's worship in ways that even other Slaaneshi followers find disturbing. Let us also consider a figure who occupies a unique position in the ecosystem of daily life under Slaanesh. Fabius Bile, the primogenitor, the clone lord, once the chief apothecary of the Emperor's children, and now a wandering mad scientist whose experiments have shaped the course of the long war for 10,000 years. Fabius is, technically, a member of the Emperor's children. He carries their gene seed. He fought alongside Fulgrim during the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy. He witnessed the corruption of the Third Legion firsthand and participated in the horrors that followed. But Fabius does not worship Slaanesh. He does not worship anyone. He is, in his own estimation, a man of science, a researcher whose work transcends the petty loyalties of gods and empires. Why, his daily life is defined not by devotion to the Dark Prince, but by an obsession with the modification and perfection of the human body that predates the Legion's fall and that has only intensified in the millennia since. Fabius's laboratories, which have been set up on dozens of different worlds and ships over the centuries, are places of concentrated horror, where the human body is disassembled and reassembled with a precision and creativity that makes the modifications of Slaaneshi cults look crude by comparison. Yet despite his professed atheism, Fabius cannot escape the shadow of Slaanesh. His obsession with perfection, his refusal to accept the limitations of the flesh, his willingness to push the boundaries of what is biologically possible, regardless of the cost in suffering, all of these are quintessentially Slaaneshi traits. The Dark Prince does not need Fabius's worship to claim him. The obsession itself is worship enough. Every experiment Fabius conducts, every modification he makes, every boundary he crosses in his relentless pursuit of the perfect organism feeds the hunger of a god he refuses to acknowledge. This makes Fabius a particularly interesting case study in the daily life of someone under Slaanesh's influence who does not believe themselves to be under Slaanesh's influence. His routine is one of disciplined research and experimentation, utterly unlike the hedonistic excess of a typical Slaaneshi devotee. And yet the result is the same. The pursuit of perfection, pushed beyond all reasonable limits, serving a hunger that can never be satisfied. There is also the matter of the Mask of Slaanesh, and a unique demon whose daily existence provides a fascinating glimpse into the relationship between art and punishment in the Dark Prince's domain. The Mask was once the greatest dancer among the demonettes, Slaanesh's personal entertainer, whose performances were said to be so beautiful that they could bring tears to the eyes of beings who had forgotten how to weep. But the Mask committed an unforgivable sin. It danced so well that Slaanesh was momentarily moved from the throne, drawn into the dance by the sheer power of the performance. For this transgression, for daring to be so perfect that the god itself was compelled to respond, the Mask was cursed. It was condemned to dance forever, without rest, without pause, without the ability to stop. Its feet carry it across the galaxy, through real space and the warp alike. And wherever it passes, its dance compels all who witness it to join in, whether they want to or not. Mortal onlookers find themselves moving in time to a rhythm they cannot hear, their bodies obeying a choreography they never learned, dancing until their hearts give out, or their bones break, or their muscles tear themselves free from the ligaments that anchor them. The Mask dances through battlefields, through cities, through space hulks and demon worlds, leaving trails of broken, exhausted bodies in its wake. The daily life of the Mask is therefore one of perpetual motion and perpetual performance, a punishment that is also a form of perfection, a curse that is also the ultimate expression of the art that the Mask was created to embody. It cannot stop, it cannot rest, it cannot choose where to go or what to dance. It simply moves, eternally, a living embodiment of the principle that in Slaanesh's domain, perfection and punishment are the same thing. This idea, that the gift and the curse are indistinguishable, is perhaps the most important thing to understand about daily life under Slaanesh. Every blessing the Dark Prince bestows is also a burden. Every enhancement is also an addiction. Every moment of transcendent pleasure creates a corresponding moment of unbearable deprivation when the pleasure fades. The enhanced senses that make the world so vivid also make the absence of stimulation physically painful. The heightened capacity for emotion that allows for experiences of joy and beauty that no unmodified human could achieve also allows for depths of despair and anguish that no unmodified human could survive. The creative gifts that produce art of staggering power and beauty also produce an insatiable hunger for more creation that devours the creator from within. This duality runs through every level of Slaaneshi existence, from the newest mortal cultist to the oldest demon prince. It is the defining feature of daily life under the Dark Prince, the thread that connects the silk-hoarding manufacturing worker to the 10,000-year-old noise marine to the dancing demon that cannot stop. They are all trapped in the same paradox. The more they receive, the more they need. The more they feel, the less they can tolerate feeling nothing. The more they pursue, the further the goal recedes. It is a treadmill disguised as a staircase, always seeming to go up while never actually arriving anywhere. And the runners upon it can see the deception clearly, but cannot bring themselves to step off, because the alternative, standing still, is the one thing their corrupted natures cannot allow. This is the existential horror at the heart of Slaanesh's worship. Not the monsters, or the mutations, or the demonic incursions. Those are the visible manifestations, the symptoms, rather than the disease. The true horror is the trap itself, the inescapable logic of escalating need that turns every gift into a chain and every pleasure into a down payment on a greater suffering. It is a horror that resonates beyond the fictional universe of Warhammer 40,000, because it speaks to something real in the human experience, the way that desire grows when it is fed rather than shrinking, the way that having more always seems to create the need for more still, the way that the pursuit of happiness can become its own obstacle when the pursuit itself becomes more important than the finding. In the end, that is perhaps why Slaanesh, among all the chaos gods, feels the most real. Khorne is rage, and rage is something most people can recognize and resist. Nurgle is despair, and despair, while powerful, can be fought with hope. Tzeentch is ambition, and ambition, while dangerous, can be channeled into productive ends. But Slaanesh is desire itself, the wanting that lives at the core of every sentient being, the engine that drives all achievement and all destruction, the force that builds civilizations and tears them down. You cannot fight desire by denying it, because denial is itself a form of desire. The desire for purity, for control, for the satisfaction of having resisted. And you cannot fight it by indulging it, because indulgence only makes it stronger. You can only live with it, balanced on the razor's edge between enough and too much, and hope that you never slip. In the grim darkness of the far future, most people slip. And when they do, Slaanesh is waiting to catch them, with open arms, and a smile that shows too many teeth, and a whisper that sounds, in that first terrible, beautiful, irresistible moment, exactly like freedom. There is one final daily ritual that deserves mention, one that unites all of Slaanesh's followers, from the lowest to the highest, from the mortal to the demonic, from the willing devotee to the reluctant victim. It is the moment of reflection, not the disciplined, structured reflection of a Space Marine chapter, nor the prayerful meditation of an Imperial saint, as it is something more personal and more devastating. It is the moment, usually in the quiet hours when the stimulation has momentarily ebbed and the world has gone temporarily grey, when the follower of Slaanesh looks at what they have become and remembers what they once were. For the newest cultists, this reflection might bring a flash of guilt, a moment of doubt, a whispered question about whether the path they have chosen is truly the right one. These doubts are quickly drowned in the next wave of sensation, but they exist, and their existence is itself a source of suffering that feeds the Dark Prince. For the more advanced followers, the reflection has a different quality. It is not guilt, but recognition. They can see, with perfect clarity, the trajectory of their corruption. That they can trace the line from the first scrap of silk to the current state of their existence, with all its impossible beauty and impossible horror. And they can see, stretching out ahead of them, the path they are still walking, the escalating demands, the narrowing options, the inevitable destination that awaits at the end. Some react to this recognition with defiance, throwing themselves even more enthusiastically into the pursuit of excess, determined to wring every last drop of sensation from their existence before the end comes. Others react with something approaching peace, accepting the path they have chosen and the price it demands with a serenity that would be admirable if it were not so fundamentally wrong. And a very few, a vanishingly small number, react with genuine horror, recognizing for the first time the full scope of the trap they have walked into and desperately seeking a way out. These last, the ones who try to escape, face a challenge that is almost without precedent in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. Because walking away from Slaanesh is not simply a matter of choosing to stop. The modifications to the body, the rewiring of the nervous system, the addiction to sensation that has been built into every nerve and every synapse, all of these continue to demand their due regardless of the devotee's intentions. The cravings do not stop because you want them to. The enhanced senses do not dull because you wish they would. The hunger, the terrible, bottomless hunger for more, does not abate simply because you have decided that you have had enough. The few accounts of successful escape from Slaanesh's service are among the most harrowing tales in the Inquisition's archives. They speak of years of agonizing withdrawal, of senses that scream for stimulation that the penitent is desperately trying to deny them, of nights spent writhing in a darkness that feels like being buried alive because the modified eyes can see things in the dark that no one should have to see. They speak of physical deterioration as the body, deprived of the warp energies that were sustaining it, begins to fail. They speak of psychological torment as the mind, stripped of the constant input that had become its normal operating condition, collapses into states of depression and dissociation so severe that even the ecclesiarchy's most experienced confessors struggle to reach the sufferer. And even those who survive this process, even those who somehow manage to claw their way back to something approaching normal human existence, carry the scars forever. The enhanced senses may dull, but they never return entirely to baseline. The memories of what it felt like to live under Slaanesh's influence remain vivid and compelling, calling to the former devotee in moments of weakness, like the scent of a meal to a starving person. The mark, invisible perhaps to normal eyes, but always there, always present. A brand on the soul that says, "This one was mine." Because Slaanesh does not forget. And Slaanesh does not forgive. And the Dark Prince always leaves the door open. Just a crack. Just enough to let the light in. Just enough to remind the fugitive of what they left behind, and to promise, with infinite patience and infinite tenderness, that they can always come back, that the door is never locked, that the first taste is free, and the terrible, heartbreaking truth is that most of them do come back, not because they are weak, not because they are evil, but because Slaanesh showed them a world that was more vivid, more beautiful, more alive than anything they had ever experienced. And the memory of that world is a wound that never heals. Given enough time, given enough moments of ordinary human grayness, given enough quiet nights when the memory calls to them with a voice that sounds like music and feels like warmth, most of them find their way back to the Dark Prince's embrace. And the music starts again, and the colors return, and for one brief, beautiful, devastating moment, and everything feels exactly the way it is supposed to feel, until it does not, and the spiral continues, and the price goes up, and the debt grows deeper, and Slaanesh smiles, and the universe keeps turning, and somewhere, always somewhere, the whisper begins anew. And so we come to the part of the story that most Slaaneshi worshippers do not want to think about. The price. Because the Dark Prince does not give without taking, and the currency in which payment is extracted is nothing less than the soul itself. The progression of corruption in a Slaaneshi worshipper follows a pattern that is as predictable as it is tragic. In the early stages, the corruption is almost entirely positive from the worshipper's perspective. Senses are sharpened, experiences are intensified, life becomes richer, more vivid, more meaningful, as the worshipper feels liberated, enlightened, as if they have been walking through the world with a blindfold and earplugs and have finally been set free to perceive reality as it truly is. This stage can last for years, even decades, and during this time, the worshipper is often genuinely happier than they have ever been. But the nature of Slaanesh's gifts is that they come with a built-in escalation mechanism. The enhanced senses that made ordinary life so vivid gradually become the new normal, and the ordinary becomes unbearable. The meal that delighted the enhanced palate last month is merely adequate this month and will be inedible next month. The music that brought tears of joy to enhanced ears last year is merely pleasant this year and will be grating noise next year. For the experiences that once represented the height of pleasure become the new baseline, and anything less triggers a withdrawal response that is physical, emotional, and spiritual in nature. This is the trap at the heart of Slaanesh's philosophy. The pursuit of ever greater sensation is not a path with a destination. It is a spiral, each revolution wider and deeper than the last, carrying the worshipper further from anything recognizable as normal human experience. And with each revolution, the cost increases. The modifications needed to sustain ever higher levels of sensation become more extreme, more dangerous, and more visibly inhuman. The substances required to push the brain's capacity for experience beyond its current limits become more exotic and more destructive. The acts required to achieve the necessary intensity of sensation cross lines that the worshipper would once have considered unthinkable. The physical transformation of a long-term Slaaneshi worshipper is deeply disturbing. In the early stages, the changes are subtle and often attractive. Enhanced symmetry, smoother skin, more vivid eyes, a grace of movement that seems almost supernatural. These changes are gifts of Slaanesh, rewards for devotion, and they serve the practical purpose of making the worshipper more attractive and thus more effective as a recruiter. But as the corruption deepens, the changes become less subtle and less attractive. Extrasensory organs appear, growing from the skin like fleshy antennae, twitching at stimuli that no natural sense could detect. The hands elongate, the fingers becoming nimble and precise, but also sharp and predatory. The eyes change color, shifting through the spectrum in response to the worshipper's emotional state. Patterns appear on the skin, swirling designs that seem to move when viewed from the corner of the eye, the mark of Slaanesh making itself known through the flesh of its servant. In the later stages, the transformation accelerates. The boundary between the worshipper's body and the warp begins to erode, allowing warp energy to flow through their flesh in ways that produce visible and often bizarre effects. Limbs may multiply or change shape. The voice may develop harmonic overtones that make normal speech impossible, but that can produce sounds of supernatural beauty or devastating force. The face may lose its fixed form, becoming a shifting canvas of expressions that reflects the worshipper's heightened emotional state in real time. Some worshippers develop the ability to project their emotions onto others, a psychic gift that makes them incredibly charismatic, but also incredibly dangerous, as the emotions they project are drawn from the deepest and darkest wells of Slaaneshi corruption. And for those who survive the physical transformation, who endure the escalating demands of their enhanced senses, who keep pushing forward on the spiral of excess without being destroyed by it, there are two possible final destinations. The first is ascension, the rarest and most coveted reward that Slaanesh can bestow, the transformation of a mortal being into a demon prince. This is the promise that drives the most ambitious of Slaanesh's followers, but the ultimate expression of the Dark Prince's philosophy of perfection through excess. A demon prince of Slaanesh is a being of terrifying power and beauty, a creature that exists simultaneously in the material world and the warp, whose senses encompass frequencies and dimensions that no mortal could perceive, whose capacity for experience is literally infinite. But the road to demonhood is narrow and treacherous, and the vast majority of Slaanesh's followers do not reach it. The second, far more common, final destination is the one that the cultists and the champions and the noise marines dread more than death itself. It is called spawndom. A chaos spawn is what happens when the mutations and transformations that chaos inflicts on its followers exceed the capacity of the body and mind to contain them. Like the process is sudden and catastrophic. One moment, the worshipper is a sentient being, corrupted and transformed but still recognizably themselves, still capable of thought and feeling and will. The next moment, the mutations that have been accumulating in their flesh erupt all at once, overwhelming the body's structure, and the mind's coherence in a flood of uncontrolled growth and change. The result is a chaos spawn, a writhing, formless mass of flesh and mutation that bears no resemblance to the being it once was. It has no mind, no identity, no will. It is a biological machine, driven by instinct and pain, lumbering across the battlefield or through the corridors of whatever space it happens to occupy, attacking anything that moves because attacking is the only behavior its ruined nervous system can still produce. For a Slaaneshi worshipper, spawndom is the ultimate horror. It is not death, because the spawn is alive. It is not life, because the spawn has no capacity for the experiences that define Slaaneshi existence. It is a prison of flesh, a sensory deprivation chamber made from the worshipper's own body. And the most terrible thing about it is that some spawns retain just enough consciousness to be aware of what they have become. They can feel the mutations writhing inside them, can sense the world through organs that no longer report coherent information, can remember what it was like to be someone with a name and a purpose and a capacity for pleasure. But they cannot act on these memories. They cannot think clearly enough to form intentions or communicate or do anything but suffer in a state of permanent, inarticulate agony. This is the Dark Prince's final joke. The being who sought sensation above all things ends up trapped in a form that can barely sense at all. The artist becomes a blob. The musician becomes a noise. The lover becomes a thing that drives away everything it touches. The pursuit of excess ends in a poverty of experience so absolute that it makes the grey drudgery of an imperial manufactorum look like paradise by comparison. The fear of spawndom drives much of the behavior of advanced Slaaneshi worshippers. Every new modification, every escalation of sensation, every boundary crossed, brings them one step closer to the point of no return. The most successful cultists and champions learn to walk this edge with extraordinary precision, pushing themselves as far as they can go without triggering the cascade of uncontrolled mutation that ends in spawndom. This is itself a form of Slaaneshi worship, a high-wire act performed over an abyss of formless horror, the thrill of the risk adding another layer of sensation to an existence already saturated with it. But even those who avoid spawndom, even those who achieve demonhood, or simply endure long enough to die of combat or exhaustion or some other conventional cause, do not escape Slaanesh. The soul of a Slaaneshi worshipper belongs to the Dark Prince, and at the moment of death, it is drawn into the warp, like water drawn into a drain. There, in the infinite depths of Slaanesh's domain, it becomes raw material for the god's pleasure. It might be consumed outright, its psychic energy devoured by the insatiable hunger that defines Slaanesh's existence. It might be shaped into a lesser demon, its identity dissolved and reformed into something that serves the Dark Prince's will. It might be kept whole, preserved as a plaything, subjected to an eternity of sensation that makes the most extreme experiences of mortal life feel like a gentle breeze by comparison. There is no peace for the servants of Slaanesh, not in life and not in death. The worship that began with a scrap of silk and a stolen moment of pleasure ends in an eternity of experience that the worshipper can neither control nor escape. This is the true daily life under Slaanesh, not just the perfumed evenings and the heightened senses and the art that moves the soul, but the price, at the ever-escalating price that must be paid in flesh and sanity, and ultimately in the coin of the soul itself. And the most terrible thing about it, the most horrifying, gut-wrenching, faith-shaking thing about the worship of Slaanesh, even knowing all of this, even understanding the price, even seeing the spawns and the demon worlds and the screaming faces in Lucius's armor, people still choose it. Every day, across 1,000,000 worlds, in every hive city and spire palace and frontier outpost in the Imperium, someone hears the whisper of the Dark Prince and leans in to listen. Someone finds a scrap of silk and feels something stir inside them that they cannot name. And someone attends a meeting of what seems like a perfectly innocent social club and discovers that the universe contains more beauty and more sensation and more possibility than they ever imagined. because that is Slaanesh's greatest weapon. Not corruption, not mutation, not demons or demon worlds, or the screaming void of the warp. Slaanesh's greatest weapon is the truth. The truth that life can feel better than this. The truth that there are experiences waiting to be had that you cannot even imagine from where you are standing. The truth that the grey, grinding, joyless existence that the Imperium calls faithful service is not the only option. There is another way. A more beautiful way. A way that feels like freedom and looks like paradise and sounds like the most perfect music you have ever heard. And the fact that this way leads to damnation does not make it any less seductive. Because by the time you realize where the road leads, you are already too far along it to turn back. And the truth, the final, inescapable, devastating truth, is that you do not want to turn back. Because even knowing the cost, even seeing the price tag written in flesh and madness, and the screaming faces of the damned, what Slaanesh offers still feels worth it. That is the power of the Dark Prince. That is the horror of She Who Thirsts. And that is why, in the grim darkness of the far future, the youngest of the Chaos Gods may ultimately prove to be the most dangerous. The Imperium knows this, of course. The Inquisition, that vast and secretive organization that serves as humanity's first and last line of defense against the corruption of chaos, devotes enormous resources to the identification and elimination of Slaaneshi cults. The Ordo Hereticus, in particular, has developed sophisticated methods for detecting the early signs of Slaaneshi corruption in imperial populations. Changes in purchasing patterns, unusual consumption of sensory goods, reports of unauthorized gatherings, increases in the production of art and music in populations that are not supposed to be producing art and music. All of these are red flags that can trigger an inquisitorial investigation, and such investigations, when they uncover a Slaaneshi cult, are conducted with extreme prejudice. The standard response to a confirmed Slaaneshi cult is extermination. Not arrest, not trial, not rehabilitation, but extermination. The cult members are hunted down and killed. Their meeting places are burned. Their art is destroyed. Their modifications are studied by the Inquisition's biosavants and then purged from the record. Even the memory of the cult is erased. The official records amended to show that the cult's members died of disease or industrial accident or some other mundane cause. The Inquisition understands better than anyone that the most dangerous thing about Slaaneshi corruption is its appeal, and that the best way to prevent it from spreading is to ensure that no one ever knows it existed. But the Inquisition is fighting a war it cannot win, because the conditions that produce Slaaneshi cults are built into the very fabric of imperial society. The Imperium's obsession with suffering and denial, its insistence that pleasure is suspect and beauty is dangerous, its reduction of human existence to a grim, yet grey cycle of toil and worship and death, creates the perfect breeding ground for the corruption of the Dark Prince. Every imperial citizen who has never heard music that was not a hymn, who has never tasted food that was not nutrient-paced, who has never touched anything softer than standard issue fabric, is a potential convert. All they need is a crack in the wall, a scrap of silk, a moment of beauty in a world that offers none. The ecclesiarchy's response to this vulnerability is to double down on the doctrine of denial. Suffering is holy, pleasure is sin, joy is the gateway to corruption. But this approach, while it may protect some, also drives others directly into Slaanesh's arms. Because when you teach people that all pleasure is evil, you ensure that anyone who experiences pleasure will believe they have already fallen. And those who believe they have already fallen have no reason not to fall further. The Imperium's own ideology creates the very converts it seeks to prevent, a paradox that Slaanesh, were the Dark Prince capable of irony, would find endlessly amusing. The Space Marines, those genetically enhanced warriors who serve as the Imperium's greatest defenders, are not immune to this corruption. The Emperor's children are the most obvious example, but they are far from the only Space Marine chapter to have fallen to Slaanesh. Over the 10,000 years since the heresy, numerous chapters have succumbed to the Dark Prince's influence. their pursuit of martial excellence sliding imperceptibly into an obsession with perfection that Slaanesh finds irresistible. Even chapters that remain loyal are not entirely safe. At the drive for excellence that defines a space marine, the constant striving to be better, faster, stronger, more skilled, more disciplined, is itself a form of obsession that the Dark Prince can exploit. The line between the holy pursuit of perfection in the Emperor's name and the damning pursuit of perfection in Slaanesh's name is razor thin, and it moves. The Aeldari, Slaanesh's first and most personal victims, live every day with the knowledge that the Dark Prince hungers for their souls with a specificity and an intensity that it reserves for no other species. The Craftworld Aeldari bind their souls to spirit stones and walk the narrow paths of their structured society, every aspect of their existence designed to prevent the emotional excess that might draw Slaanesh's attention. Mars the Harlequins dance their dances and perform their plays, keeping the memory of the fall alive so that it can never be forgotten and never repeated. And the Drukhari, in their dark city of Komorah, feed the hunger of Slaanesh with the suffering of others, knowing that if they ever stop, if the flow of pain and anguish ever falters, the Dark Prince will turn that hunger on them. All of these responses, from the Inquisition's purges to the Aeldari's paths to the Drukhari's endless cruelty, are ultimately defensive measures. They are walls built against a tide that never stops rising. Because Slaanesh is not merely a threat to be defended against, Slaanesh is a force of nature, as fundamental to the existence of sentient life as gravity is to the existence of matter. Wherever there are beings capable of feeling, or wherever there are minds capable of desire, wherever there is consciousness capable of experience, Slaanesh is there. The Dark Prince does not need to recruit. The Dark Prince does not need to corrupt. Slaanesh merely needs to wait, because the nature of mortal existence is such that every sentient being, given enough time and enough opportunity, will eventually feel the pull of excess. And so the daily life under Slaanesh continues, across 1,000,000 worlds and through 10,000 years of endless war. In the hive cities, the cults gather in their hidden chambers, sharing pleasures that no imperial citizen is supposed to know exist. In the underhives, the communities of the devoted build their alternative civilizations, free from the constraints of imperial law and imperial faith. In the Eye of Terror, the Emperor's children continue their 10,000-year descent into ever greater extremes of sensation, their noise marines composing symphonies of destruction that shatter reality itself. In the Warp, the demons of Slaanesh dance and scheme and compete for the favor of a god whose appetite can never be satisfied. And at the center of it all, in the Palace of Pleasure, behind the 6 circles of seduction, the youngest of the Chaos gods sits upon a throne of crystallized desire and watches and waits and thirsts. The whisper never stops. It is there in the background of every mortal life, a suggestion, a possibility, a promise of something more. It does not demand. It does not threaten. It merely offers, with infinite patience and infinite confidence, the knowledge that the universe contains more beauty, more sensation, but more experience than any single life could ever exhaust. And for those who listen, for those who lean in just a little closer, for those who allow themselves to wonder what it would feel like to live without limits, the whisper becomes a song, and the song becomes a symphony, and the symphony becomes the soundtrack to a life that is more vivid, more intense, more alive than anything the person ever imagined possible. Until the music stops, and the bill comes due, and they discover, too late, that the Dark Prince always collects. That, in all its terrible, seductive, heartbreaking complexity, is what daily life under Slaanesh really looks like in Warhammer 40,000. It is not the simple story of good versus evil that the Imperial Creed would have you believe. It is a story about desire, and about the gap between what life offers and what life could offer, about the choices that people make when they are given the opportunity to feel something more than the grey nothingness that the universe seems to reserve for most of its inhabitants. It is a story about beauty and horror and the terrifying ease with which one can become the other. And it is a story that never ends, because as long as there are beings in the galaxy who can feel, who can want, who can dream of something better than what they have, Slaanesh will be there, waiting, whispering, offering a hand that is warm and inviting and tipped with claws of purest silver. Thank you so much for listening, and for joining me on this journey through some of the darkest and most fascinating corners of the Warhammer 40,000 universe. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the daily life under Slaanesh, I would love it if you could smash that like button and subscribe to Q on 40K for more content like this. Your support means the world to me and helps me keep making these long-form explorations of the lore that we all love so much. If you have thoughts, questions, or topics you would like to see covered in a future video, drop them in the comments below. I read every single one. And remember, in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war, but there is also an incredible wealth of stories waiting to be told. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next one.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any. And yeah, sleep well.